Uh, Good morning. This is afternoon in India, and pleased to welcome you to this session organized by CUTS on time to agree or not disagree, the imperative of reforming the WTO's appellate body. We have three panelists, Anders Anlik of the National Board of Trade in Stockholm, Uliana Pexito, and Stephen Olson from Hendrick Foundation in the US. Stephen, are you there? Can't see you.
Yes, sir.
Oh, good. Welcome. Welcome. So let me welcome all of you once again. And let's kick off, having limited time. Though we have only three panelists, so therefore there is sufficient time for each of you, which is about 8 minutes each. After I conclude my opening remarks, it will soon be 2 years since the WTO appellate body ceased to function. There are currently, I'm told, 21 panel reports that have been appealed into the void, into the vacuum, since the appellate body became defunct. WTO members and groups of countries have submitted various proposals for reform of the appellate body. EU has led an initiative to establish a multi-party interim appeal arrangement, what is called the MPIA, which uses arbitration as the second tier of dispute settlement as an alternate to the appellate body. The Walker process, led by Ambassador David Walker of New Zealand, has also made efforts to address the issues relating to the functioning of the appellate body. On the whole, while there seems to be intent to resolve the crisis and resurrect the appellate body, it has not been accompanied by either political will or action. In a recent meeting between the USTR and the WTO Director General, while there was an agreement that MC12 needs to deliver outcomes on issues like fisheries, subsidies, there was no specific reference to the resolution of the appellate body crisis, which is a great pity. The US view seems to be that first the existing trade rules need to be overhauled, and only then can an appellate body function and decide on violation of these rules. This is what I'm told, but I find that quite ludicrous. I mean, the WTO has been in existence since 1995 and has resolved a very large number of disputes and enabled the trading system to move forward as smoothly as possible. However, we believe that a working two-tier dispute settlement mechanism with an appellate body as its center is essential for a well-functioning multilateral trading system under the WTO. It brings predictability and security, which is the foundation of the WTO system. We also believe that a well-functioning dispute settlement mechanism will in turn inspire fresh efforts towards negotiations and modernization of the rules. The WTO's crown jewel has become more a crown of thorns in the past few years. We need to find a way to get the sheen of the crown jewel back. As I was telling the WTO DG Ngozi the other day, whenever I talk to even educated friends of mine who don't follow trade policy issues, their opinion is that the WTO is dead because of this particular fact, and this is an impression which needs to be cleared very widely. And therefore, I was arguing with Ngozi that this should be the top priority of the. Now, if things are not going to move forward as we see, we hope that the discussion that we're going to have today, and what have also happened in similar sessions in this public symposium organized by others, would arrive at some sort of way forward. And we hope that our distinguished panelists will share a range of perspectives on the crisis, the urgent need for reforms, and the way forward. Each of our panelists will get 8 minutes to make their initial remarks, after which we will have a panel discussion where I will pose questions to the panelists. At the end, we will take a few questions from the participants, and therefore the audience is requested to please key in their questions. I don't think they would be allowed any kind of oral intervention. In their remarks, I would request Anders to provide an European Union perspective on the appellate body reform, Juliana to survey the range of issues involved in the reform of appellate body, and finally, Stephen to provide some US perspectives on appellate body reform and the way forward. Over to you, Anders, 8 minutes, sir.
Thank you very much, Pradeep, and thank you very much for the invitation to participate in this interesting and important panel. Now, you started off by mentioning that the dispute settlement system of the WTO has been hailed as the crown jewel of the multilateral rules-based trading system, and there are, of course, as you indicated, good reasons for doing so. As the World Trade Organization at large, the dispute settlement understanding is crucial, in particular for smaller and medium-sized trading nations, developing countries that lack the power of the strong. As we all know, and you indicated that as well, the dispute settlement system is presently out of order. It has been so since the mid-2017 due to the US blockage of new members of the appellate body. From my point of view, there is an evident need to restore the two-tier system. It's crucial not only for the dispute settlement system as such, but also for a well-functioning World Trade Organization at large, and for the confidence in the organization as the core of the global trading system. Hence, the restoration of the two-phase dispute settlement system is a critical component of the kind of WTO reform that the European Union wants to achieve, and it's crucial for Sweden as an EU member. We don't want to go back to the GATT years when the dispute settlement system lacked teeth. I might tell you that I have personal experience of the GATT system. As a young Swedish trade official, I worked on 2 Swedish anti-dumping disputes with the United States in the late 1980s and early 1990s. Both panels ruled in favor of Sweden, but it was all in vain, since the United States at the time refused to implement the findings of the panel reports. But despite this experience, I also think that it is important to recognize that both the WTO as such and its dispute settlement system came to fruition during a very special and narrow window of opportunity in the history of international economic relations. After World War II, as you know, the US did not approve, it rejected the ambitious International Trade Organization. The General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade came about as an alternative, a provisional one. And the United States, throughout the time of the GATT, maintained its very cautious attitude when it came to issues that it thought interfered with its sovereignty. And I think it's also worth to recall that at the birth of the World Trade Organization in 1995 that you alluded to, the United States was still quite reluctant to give all these formal rights to this new formal organization with its two-tier DSU. This all happened in a period that was characterized by enthusiasm after the end of the Cold War and positive winds of globalization. It would probably not have happened neither earlier nor much later. I have also to confess that I have some understanding for the frustration that you as representatives have concerning so-called overreach by the appellate body. Again, as a much younger trade official, I sat through numerous negotiating sessions during the Uruguay round on the new anti-dumping agreement, for instance, as a Nordic delegate at the time. And however outrageous most of us found and still find, for instance, the so-called zeroing methodology used to calculate dumping margins in the United States, the Commerce and USTR negotiators never budged an inch when it came to defending the US right to use that methodology. Nevertheless, as you know, it has been ruled illegal in a number of appellate body outcomes. And seen in this light, I believe the present controversy and unfortunate situation should come as no surprise. However, for the future, we of course mustn't lose sight of the fact that the two-tier dispute settlement system with its review body is there to ensure, as you mentioned, predictability and legitimacy. And for most WTO members, including for the European Union, the system has achieved its aim. For the US, it has apparently not in all respects. So to make it possible to move on, this situation has to be rectified, however much one and I would like to maintain the pre-2017 status quo. And against this background, and despite not being dissatisfied with the dispute settlement system, the EU and its member states support a reform of the system, but a reform that preserves the role of the appellate body. This is not going to be easy due to the distance between the positions of the EU on the one hand and many other member states, and the US on the other hand. And this, of course, raises the question of what should be reformed. First, one line of criticism against DSU has centered around procedural challenges, such as the 90-day rule for the duration of an appeal. I think it is important to see and put this in perspective of the fact that it took the EU and the US more than 17 years to come even close to a solution to the Airbus-Boeing dispute, for instance, throughout the agreement reached this spring. And I believe it should be possible to find solution to the largely administrative problems that have been raised under the DSU umbrella without too much difficulties, even if they will in the future also involve some budgetary considerations. Second, the appellate body has also been criticized for overstepping its mandate by creating WTO precedents. On the one hand, of course, there is no such thing as precedents within the WTO. On the other hand, it is evidently the task of the appellate body to seek to resolve the same legal question in the same way in subsequent cases, as it were. And this is important to ensure security and predictability in the WTO, not only for the sake of WTO members, but even more so for companies that trade and invest. Third, the appellate body has been criticized for overreach, as I mentioned, and judicial activism even. This line of criticism is more difficult to handle, of course, but the EU and the US have both had their red lines in the Uruguay round negotiations leading to the present rule book of the WTO. And absent clear rules in some instances, the appellate body has been forced to make decisions on how to interpret the vague and maybe unclear rules in the agreements. And this is true, for instance, concerning issues such as zeroing that I mentioned and public body in the trade remedies field. Here, you could argue that the inability of the WTO's negotiating arm to deliver clear rules has forced the dispute settlement system to step in to rectify the situation. In theory, this problem could be resolved if WTO members managed to update the existing rules or managed to decide upon authoritative interpretations of them. In practice, of course, this has proved difficult within an organization that is operating on the basis of consensus concerning important decisions as these amongst members. Now, to conclude, I believe, and the European Union believes, that it is time to agree on reforming the appellate body. This might require some changes to the existing regime regarding the appellate body, some of which might even be warranted, but it would also require the United States to come to the negotiating table. The impasse cannot be solved without the US engaging in discussion and without the US presenting concrete proposals. Having said this, it must also be recognized that getting the US on board would have to involve consideration of issues of importance to the United States, such as the question of zeroing in the area of trade remedies. Thank you very much, Pradeep.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Anders. I think the last word that you left at is something we're still befuddles my mind about the zeroing thing. I mean, you can't do that. Now, Anders, the year I was born, 1948, was when the Havana Charter was crafted. And if you remember, there was a discussion on having an international trade organization at that time, which was also shot down by the US Congress, exactly on the same grounds that this is going to impinge on our sovereignty. So we see there is a historical connect to this particular thing, and this happened now. I don't know what would happen now. with the kind of situation as it exists in terms of geopolitics, of where does US stand, after especially the Afghanistan fiasco, which has led to very global criticism. With that, let me now request Juliana. And Anders, thank you for keeping in your time.
Well, can you listen to me?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Pradeep, Bipul, Katz for the invitation. Well, here in Buenos Aires it's 6:40 a.m., so good morning. Well, organizers sent me two very interesting questions. I tried to answer with some points and leaving some scenarios. Thank you.
Juliana, that is those questions I will ask once you made your opening remarks. I have questions for all the three panelists.
Yes.
So that was sent to you in advance to be prepared for it. But you're welcome to answer them now or answer them later.
Yes. Well, thank you. I remember last year in a CUTS workshop called something like what would happen in a world without the WTO. So we have discussed many points, and some of them are very related with the future of the appellate body. So I bring here part of that discussion. So first, I'd like to say that I think the WTO is victim of its own success. So, and its success is directly associated with a very short period of consensus in the multilateral trading system. So, I mean, the whole WTO structure was designed to, and in an exceptional world, in an exceptional moment in the history of the multilateral trading system, and a world that no longer exists, of course, and that it's not likely to come back, because it's very hard to imagine such a convergence of events coming together again for the next decades, at least. So I have to say again that maybe we are missing something that was actually exceptional in the history of the multilateral trading system. And examples of this period that shaped the WTO rules are precisely the appellate body and its capacity to create law by this interpretation mandate. A part of course, the single undertaking principle or the trade policy review mechanism, the TRIPS, the GATS, and so on and so forth. So I think these achievements were very important to take the multilateral trading system to another level, but they also reduce flexibility from the WTO to adapt to the geopolitical changes you mentioned, Pradeep, that we have started to see by then. So I think it's important to keep in mind that without the lowest common denominator for reaching political commitments regarding the whole WTO crisis, it's unlikely that the crisis in the appellate body can be solved. Well, second, several problems in the functioning of the appellate body have been pointed out in the last years. Some of them are related to this exceptional moment in the multilateral rules. Some of them are not. I will not repeat critics because Mr. Anhild mentioned already, but they can be identified in two main groups: delays in the reviews and overreaching decisions. And the last challenge is part of a profound legitimacy crisis of the appellate body. So to the question about how far a legalist approach can help solve the crisis, a political crisis or political challenge, I think the answer is very little. However, I think legal solutions can help to identify possibilities, both provisional ones that can be implemented meanwhile, and more permanent ones that will be implemented when the political situation becomes more favorable. So legal solutions can also help bridging differences. And by saying that, I take the second questions you sent me about the role of middle powers can play in the WTO crisis, and particularly in the appellate body reform. So I think it's important to say that middle powers, at least the two cases that I know better, Argentina or Brazil, most Brazil than Argentina, had to learn how to use rules, how to play the game in order to improve policy spaces, since those countries are more often rule takers than rule makers. So in the case, at least of some South American countries, which are very skilled in taking advantage of international law to expand their policy space possibilities, I think at a micro level, of course, I think its legal solutions are crucial. There are several examples of that, not only in trade law, but in, I don't know, freshwater regimes, the law of the sea, non-proliferation regimes, climate change topics, and so on and so forth. So in that case, my answer is related to the first question, to the extent that middle powers can help to identify those legal solutions that are more in line with their political and economic goals, and also with their limitations, and building answers from there. So in this sense, several possibilities were discussed with regards to the appellate body reform, and in both academic and public policy circles. For instance, a separate system for revision of trade remedies, an arbitration arrangement pursuant the Article 25, which is the MPIA, an extension to the deadline for decisions from 90 days to 120 days, or also increasing human resources in the Secretariat. So, well, in fact, the MPIA is, despite the fact that this mechanism has received some criticism, and for instance, Brazil signed, Argentina didn't, there are at least 6 cases in which the use of this procedure was agreed upon so far, and 2 of them involving China. So finally, in order to meet the time, I left 2 scenarios and also caution points. In the first one, the appellate body can be restored by one or a mix of these legal options that are already in place. And in this case, it's important to analyze implications of each option. In the second one, the appellate body and the 2-stage dispute settlement system cannot be restored. So in that case, I think it's important to pay attention to the balance between a single stage dispute settlement system and the veto capacity member countries have had during the GATT period. I mean, the capacity members had to block the adoption of panel reports during the GATT, a point that Mr. Anild mentioned before. So that's a very, very grave risk. And so I'll stop here, and I look forward for your question. Thank you very much, Pradeep.
Thank you, Juliana. And I forgot to introduce Juliana properly. She was Flaxo. And as she reminded us, we had done a series of webinars on a world without the WTO, where both Anders and Juliana had participated among others. And we have an excellent report on our website, which we've also circulated. Now, Juliana, there was I made a mistake. I mean, you were given these two questions to be part of your address, and so was Anders, which he did, very honestly. And so we would like to keep the floor discussions as possible, as far as possible. And with that, let me come to Stephen Olson. And Stephen, nice to meet you. I've been reading your excellent articles from time to time, including the work that your foundation is doing, which is good news. That I thought, normally there is trade skepticism around the world. And in that, if a new foundation gets into the picture, or at least the kind of profile that you've built up, which is excellent. Over to you, Stephen. And you know the two questions that we've asked you.
Sure.
Is it fair on the part of the US to mix the issue of the appellate bodies working with a larger WTO reforms agenda? And second is, the US has already identified its areas of concern about the functioning of the appellate body. Why does it remain reluctant to engage on the way forward to find a solution? I find it somehow, Anders, you and I go a long way into this trade world. Why block? I mean, you can always find a way out. Zero in into something, for example, that, they're not implementing the panel decision, the appellate body decision also.
Yes.
So you can get away with murder in any case if you don't do it. But why block the functioning for the rest of the world? Over to you, Stephen.
Yes. Well, thank you. Thank you very much. And good afternoon, everyone. Good morning or good evening, as the case might be. On behalf of the Heinrich Foundation, I want to very sincerely thank CUTS International for organizing today's session. It's a great pleasure to be here. Well, look, it goes without saying that the dispute settlement mechanism is a real foundational cornerstone of the WTO. So for all of us who value the WTO, the impasse over the appellate body is deeply concerning and something that we really need to get back on track. But I really want to emphasize that the appellate body impasse is really as much about the inability of the existing trade rules to adequately deal with the most important, the most impactful trade disputes that are confronting us today. Keep in mind, one of the core complaints about the appellate body from the US, which has given rise to the impasse, is that the judges were filling in the gaps in existing trade law. Well, why is that necessary? And how is it even possible? Well, the short answer is because the existing trade rules have not kept up with current day realities and desperately need to be updated. The existing trade rules were predicated on the assumption that major trading nations would be market-driven economies in which the government largely kept its nose out of the marketplace and out of business. Well, today we're in a completely different world. The largest trading nation in the world, China, is a centrally managed economy pursuing a model of state-directed capitalism. Now, look, as a sovereign nation, everyone fully respects China's right to pursue whatever model of economic development it deems most appropriate. So there's no issue about that. But we've got to recognize that China's unique model of economic development has given rise to a whole host of trade practices which have been quite distortive and which are either partially or entirely beyond the scope of existing trade rules. Now, when we consider any court system in any context in the world, whether we're talking about the WTO or any other context in the world, in order for that court system to function, it has to maintain the confidence of the stakeholders. the stakeholders need to be confident that the court system is relevant and the court system is capable of delivering fairness. So think about it this way. If you lived in a country in which the primary problem was property theft, but property theft was not against the law, you would have no confidence in the court system. If property theft was not even covered by existing laws and regulations, you wouldn't have confidence in the ability of the court system to be relevant. That is at least somewhat analogous to the situation that the WTO finds itself in today. So while the impasse over the appellate body involves a lot of nitty-gritty technical legal issues, which all of the attorneys in today's sessions will understand much better than I do, it's really linked very closely to this larger issue of the need to update trade rules to account for current day realities and to be relevant to current day realities. Now, in theory, this should be possible, right? But unfortunately, in reality, the task is much more difficult. The issues are immensely complicated, and the WTO membership is larger and more diverse than it ever has been in the past. So the prospects for reaching consensus agreement on how we update these trade rules to be more relevant to current day realities is going to be very, very difficult to do. Now, of course, in the United States, we no longer have the Trump administration. We have the Biden administration has been in office for almost a year now. And the expectation was that the Biden administration was going to take a much more, shall we say, constructive approach to the WTO than 4 years of the Trump administration, in which it seemed the Trump administration was dedicated to tearing the organization apart. And so hopes have been raised that we might finally see some serious progress on WTO reform. Unfortunately, at least in my personal judgment, I don't think that those hopes are going to be realized. The Biden administration, the first term of the Biden administration at least, is being predominated by three issues, well, two issues certainly, COVID and infrastructure. If there's a third issue that might be able to nudge its way onto the agenda, it's going to be immigration. But there's really no bandwidth to take on trade right now. These other issues are really sucking up all the oxygen in the room and certainly the legislative agenda. Now, on top of that, President Biden has a very tenuous relationship with the progressive wing in his own party. And because the Democratic majorities in both houses of Congress are so razor thin, he doesn't want to expend very precious political capital on pushing for any major trade initiatives. On top of that, if that wasn't discouraging enough, on top of that, we're almost into 2022. Now, once we get into 2022, the focus will move entirely to midterm elections and major initiatives, particularly controversial issues such as major trade initiatives, are really going to be difficult, if not impossible, to move forward. Now, I want you all to know that I am very, very sincerely hoping that my analysis is completely wrong. I'm hoping that the Biden administration will, in very productive and very constructive ways, engage in the WTO reform agenda, and we're able to resolve the impasse on appellate body and get things up and running again. And if that's the case, and if I'm fortunate enough to be invited back next year, it will be my pleasure to come back and remind everybody about how wrong I was. But at least as of today and from where I sit, I don't think that's very likely. So I think I'll draw my comments to a close there, and I'll look forward to our conversation and discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Just two responses to your point. One is this looking at WTO in the whole multilateralism agenda is important. And Biden did resuscitate US membership of the WHO, which Trump had withdrawn, if you remember. So that gave us a sign that Biden is serious about what he's been saying about, going to Malta. Secondly, in my own knowledge and experience of the US court system, the Indian court system, and other court systems, is that often courts do set up precedents for the legislators to follow. If the legislators have not done their job, then the court is not going to sit quiet. I mean, you gave the example of property theft.
Mhm.
Imagine in a country there was no law against property theft. And if the court decides that, look, property theft is bad, then the legislature is given an example, is given a signal that you better draft a law.
Mhm.
So it's the kind of same thing, and this is not something which has been unusual in our common law jurisprudence system, that the courts often do step beyond the legislative framework as it stands, where it finds there is a weakness or there is a gap, and then give signal. And therefore, then the legislative wing has to go back to the House and decide on the changes in the rules which are required, or changes or making new laws. So I find it somehow very difficult to understand as
Mhm.
to, in spite of all this that we have, we still make it a big issue that appellate body is setting trade rules. So what is wrong with that? I mean, they did that for the simple reason that it was non-existent, and that is necessary. Now it's the general body of the WTO to decide whether they're going to take it to a ministerial meeting and decide to change the rules as per the appellate body direction.
Sir, your point is certainly taken by me. I think clearly, though, it's not a point of view that the Trump administration would share, and thus far, it's unclear whether or not the Biden administration will share that view. But certainly, your point is well taken. Now, part of the difficulty, and to be clear, I do not represent the U.S. point of view.
Yeah.
Heinrich Foundation is an Asia-based organization. I started my career with the US government as a trade negotiator, but that was 35 years ago. And so I've been out of government service for a long time. So I can't speak directly to the US government view, but I don't think that they have confidence that the WTO can in fact update the rules.
All right. Now we have a question so far, one from Alexia Nefeli Duma. Do you see the MPIA as a viable model? Anders, would you like to take that question?
Well, I think the multi-party appeal arrangement is what we have, absent the appellate body. And I think you wanted to discuss, Pradeep, how handle negotiations in WTO when we don't have a functioning dispute settlement system. I think it is possible, it will be possible to move forward on the negotiating agendas that we have, hopefully, under this kind of provisorial arrangement, and having the MPAA as the substitute for those countries except the United States that are abiding by it, and so I hope that can be a instrument that can help us along the road ahead. Even if, of course, we would have to keep the objective of getting the DSU back on track, obviously.
Thank you, Juliana.
I think, at least from this point of view of these two countries I've mentioned, at the beginning, Argentina was very, I don't know, the level of rejection in the public policy circles were very, very high. Now, when we see the functioning of this arrangement, I think things may change. I'm not sure. I interviewed the ambassador, Argentina ambassador, 2 months ago, and he was very reluctant to accept this mechanism. It's not the case of Brazil, but I think there are some issues related to the veto capacity I've mentioned, because countries have to agree before to use this mechanism or appeal to an appellate body that is not functioning. So this is a way to block a case, not agreeing with the mechanism and appealing to an appellate body in which is not functioning. So I think it's a provisional solution, but it's more power-oriented than rule-oriented, of course, and it's a provisional exit or legal solution.
Stephen, would you like to respond to this question?
The only comment I'd make is, look, on an interim basis, it's probably the best that we can do for now, but we really need to get the United States constructively engaged and bring this to a firm resolution. But for on an interim basis, it's probably the best we could have hoped for.
Well, I don't see any other questions, so let me throw a wild question to our panelists. We have the International Court of Justice in Hague, which is underwork. Could that not be? Could a bench of that justice court not be the appellate body? It's comprised of selected judges, and so it's all well experienced, skilled, etc., etc. The only problem is it will not have any trade experts as the appellate body has, in order to bring in both the kind of technical understanding about trade issues. That may be an issue, but I don't know. As I said, I'm just throwing a wild question.
I don't know enough about the International Court of Justice to comment in any detail. The only thing I would say is I think that would be regarded as an absolute non-starter in Washington.
Yeah. No, US is fortunately a member of the International Court of Justice, not the International Criminal Court.
Yes, yes.
So that's why I raised this question, because the US is a part of the International Court of Justice.
Well, despite the fact that I've said that we are missing something exceptional, and I also think it's important to rebuild the public good. The WTO is a public good. So I think it's important. I agree with Mr. Stephen that it's important to rebuild bounds of trust that shaped the multilateral trading system, because it's true that the WTO dispute settlement understanding it's one of the most developed adjudication systems that in international law. So it's not. I don't want to give a wrong impression. It's true, and I believe that you have to rebuild, because as Mr. Anders said, it's very important to small and medium countries. So,
Juliana, if I may, you used a word that was really important and really resonated with me, and that was the word trust. So much of our successful multilateral trade system has been built upon the fact that we had mutual trust and we were involved in a shared common endeavor of mutual benefit. And that was sort of the invisible glue that, in my judgment, really held the global trading system together for so long. But somehow we've really lost the thread. We've really lost the plot in recent years. And that trust has really been dissipated, has really disappeared. And once you break the trust, it can be very, very difficult to restore it.
Anders, do you have any comments?
I think your question is beyond the scope of my competence. So I'm not going to prolong the discussion. I think it is, as Stephen and Juliana have said, key to do whatever we can to bring us forward within the World Trade Organization. And I really hope, Stephen, that your countrymen can come to a situation in which the US is back at the table. We've been discussing what could be happening at the upcoming ministerial, and of course this question will not be solved there. But if at least there could be some way of getting a process on WTO reform that would include in one way or another the DSU issue and the appellate body issue, I think that would be worthwhile striving for. And I know that the very able EU negotiators from the Commission who are running trade policy for us in Sweden, they are trying to do whatever they can to get this on track.
May I pose a question to my colleagues on the panel?
Sure, but I have a question for you also. Go ahead.
There's something I've been having discussions with people on, and I'd be really interested to get your perspective. Is there any chance that the impasse over the appellate body is less of a process problem and more of a people problem? In other words, if we were to get judges who were strict constructionists on the appellate body and were committed not to interpreting law, and were committed not to establishing precedent, and were committed not to filling in the gaps that we've got in existing trade law, is that a potential solution, or is that just dreaming? Do we really have a process problem here that has to be resolved? I've been kicking this around in my own head, and I'd be interested in any thoughts that you have.
Stephen, as citizens of democracies, we've seen that our jurisprudence evolves, and quite often if the legislators have failed, the court steps in. I don't see anything wrong in that, except to say that the legislators will have to take on what the court says and pass laws to deal with it. Now, Stephen, what you mentioned is something very interesting, that the WTO rules work on certain economic assumptions about members. Can the WTO really be the forum to settle the largest systemic differences between different economic models? Can we really undertake WTO reform at the behest of any one country or targeted on any one country? Now here, of course, the reference is to China, without beating the bush. And the fact is that China has taken advantage of the system, which, and therefore, whatever happened during the Trump administration, I support that particular view. Now, the interesting part is China has now made an application to join the TPP. TPP has very clear conditions on state-owned enterprises, etc., which China will have to agree with. I don't know whether they, if that happens, then naturally, then some of that is going to come here. Can we look at our agreement on subsidies and countervailing measures to deal with some of the industrial subsidies which are unfair in terms of trading, which is a fact? Stephen, over to you.
Well, a couple of thoughts. In terms of CPTPP, I actually think that China's accession to the TPP might be easier than the conventional wisdom suggests. I mean, the CPTPP has been presented as this gold standard agreement, and it does push the envelope in a number of areas, state-owned enterprises, et cetera. But if you look at the agreement closely, it does contain a tremendous amount of exceptions and loopholes that I think China would be very happy to avail itself of.
And timelines.
And timelines. You know, the accession process is a negotiation, so you can agree to take on certain obligations, but then have a very protracted phase-in period for doing that. So I actually think it was a very wise strategic move on the part of China to submit that application, because I think China actually can accede to the terms.
Stephen, a follow-up question to you. Sorry, I mean, not because you're American, but being in, how would the US react to this? Because the US was also, you know, there's been a talk about US re-entering TPP or CPTP, or sorry,
Mhm.
You know, some of these abbreviations become tongue twisters.
Yeah, yeah.
Let me call it TPP. How would US react to this kind of move by China?
It's really the $64,000 question, and I don't know. What I can tell you is that clearly CPTPP was not even on the horizon, was not even on the radar screen for the Biden administration. They weren't even thinking about CPTPP anywhere in a first Biden term. Now, whether or not China's application changes that remains entirely to be seen. I think part of it will be based on what will be the reaction of the other TPP members, how amenable will the other TPP members be to China's application? How will Japan feel about it? How will Australia feel about it? That will be interesting to see. But that's certainly the $64,000 question. I think everybody's taking it under advisement for the time being.
May I chip in?
Yeah, no,
Pradeep?
Anders, I was going to invite you,
No,
particularly with the
comment.
kind of historical knowledge that you have and the expertise that you have.
No, but I think
but why not $1 million question? Why $64,000?
No, but may I comment on Stephen's question that he put?
Yeah,
And
no,
also
certainly. I was coming to you.
Yeah,
please.
Great. No, I think, Stephen, on your question of personality versus the quality of the rules, I think you were right in your initial remarks that it is the rules that pose the problems. And I don't think different kind of personalities or different judges with different kind of background would be the thing that would make us move forward. And then on the question that we are discussing now, the situation in China, I think the multilateral rules might not be that bad after all. I don't know, you have probably seen the book by Petros Mavridis and Andrei Sapir, China and the WTO, Why Multilateralism Still Matters. And I think they quite convincingly say that the rules can help us on the state, on the subsidy issue, the state-controlled company issue, through interpretations of existing rules. I think they are arguing convincingly for that. The question is whether there is a political openness for bringing us there, and there is not presently. That's clear. The Chinese say no. And that's the one thing. And then the other big issue here, the demands put by Chinese authorities on mandatory technology transfer. There, I think new rules might be needed in the WTO. But those two aspects, according to these authors, at least, would help us move forward. And I think Mavridis and Sapir are arguing this quite convincingly in their book.
I would like to take the Stephen question. Yes, you asked me about the possibilities of an appellate, different appellate body. I think that filling gaps and analyzing law aspects beyond the factual aspects, I think that's the nature of an appellate body. So I think it's otherwise you have a panel of experts, a single stage dispute settlement system, which is it's possible. I think that the important step here is to keep the automatic adoption of the panel, for instance, or all the changes from the negative consensus to the positive consensus, all the changes we have observed from the GATT to the WTO in the dispute settlement understanding. So we can go back in time and go to a single stage. Otherwise, it's impossible to expect that an appellate body can't function like with these goals and objectives you mentioned. So I'm not sure I could answer properly your question.
Juliana, what are your views on this whole issue about different economic models? When you look at China, which is still a non-market economy.
Well, I'm not an expert on that, but I think it's for instance, here in South America, we can observe the same discussion in other level, more state or less state in economy, and I think it's a problem of the whole WTO system is not prepared to accept that kind of model. However, I think it's, for instance, if you see the renegotiation of the NAFTA is more state than less state. So you can see that the world is going there in somehow in the models of, and the WTO has or must update the rules because you can see in agreements that are being negotiated in currently. So
thank you very much. We have about 3 minutes to go. Bipul, would you like to thank our panel? Bipul? Bipul? Hello?
Yeah, I think,
Yeah.
now I can speak. So thank you very much. I think it was a good discussion. We have got a number of good inputs on this subject, and which will definitely help us in taking forward this agenda. But I'm a bit skeptical as well, in the sense that we are still going through this pandemic. It is yet to be over. I mean, as you know that how things are happening at various other levels like the WHO and various WIPO and various other international bodies. So I'm not very confident about the future of the WTO as it is today. So I understand its importance, but I'm not confident at all. So anyway, so let me thank all of you on behalf of CUTS for your time, for this very rich discussion, and let's be in touch on this subject as well as other related subjects. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Anders. Thank you, Juliana. Thank you, Stephen. And look forward
thank you.
to seeing
Thank
you
you
again. I can't say
Yes,
meeting you.
indeed.
Thank you very much.
Thanks,
Thank you
everyone.
very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.